everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider here inside the Cleveland Browns facility in, what are we in? Berea? Or is it Berea? I'm sorry to those from Ohio. I never asked what it was, but we're here, and practice just got over with between the Minnesota Vikings and the Cleveland Browns, here with Alec Lewis of The Athletic. And where do you want to begin? We watched a lot of Sam Darnold. We watched a lot of defense. You know, the defense ahead of the offense thing usually applies to early training camp, not joint practices, but it sure applied to these joint practices. We didn't have any catastrophic injuries today. There was no drama. No other travesties were announced. So we're good there. We can actually talk about what we saw in this practice and what we think of Sam Darnold going forward. Isn't that fun?
Yeah, I mean, what a ride this has been. Good Lord, in terms of the last couple of days, really going back to Monday night, where I don't know about you, but we don't need to rehash the whole deal, but going to the Vikings facility for Monday night's night practice, the last thing I thought was that it was going to turn into something that was really relevant at all. Like, I thought it was just going to be a pretty boring, fun normal night, and it was not. But yeah, to have a day where you just kind of watch football and felt like, all right, the season still is being played, and Sam Darnold will be doing the quarterbacking. I thought there were some. I'll just start. I think we should probably start with him. Like, I thought there were some plays within 7-on-7 periods in the red zone and some full team periods that, to me, were impressive. I mean, some impressive throws, some stuff over the top. And then at the end of the practice, they did like a 2-minute period where it was like the team's down 8. Can you score on the Browns defense? And there were a couple overthrows from Sam Darnold. It wasn't the sharpest. There were, I think, a lot of decisions that he was having to make in the pocket that were muddy pockets with the Browns bringing some heat with Myles Garrett and others. So just all in all, a so-so day probably is what I'd say. But I think if you were to talk about the Browns offense, like Deshaun Watson and Jameis Winston, specifically Winston, looked absolutely out of sorts against the Vikings defense. So it was just that kind of, I mean, really that kind of day in 2 days, I think, where the defenses here were clearly superior.
Yeah, I thought so. The Vikings spent a lot of time today doing their red zone drills, and I thought, ran the ball very well in those red zone drills and created some touchdowns that I think would have actually been touchdowns. Was their tackling. Trent Sherfield had a really nice catch. Justin Jefferson roasted his man in the red zone a couple of times. It's not shocking for you guys to hear Justin Jefferson's doing amazing things at camp, but he brings it every year when he goes into these joint practices. It was a great battle with their main corner who was going up against him. And I thought that when they did those red zone drills, Sam Darnold looked very comfortable getting it to his guys, and they were effective in a lot of those. Then they get to the 11-on-11, and that was what was interesting because that was going on when the Vikings defense was going 11-on-11. So it was mostly red zone drills on one side, mostly full team on the other side. So we'll get to the defense in a minute. But when they got to that 2-minute drill, those have really been fascinating for me to watch throughout this entire training camp, just because I think that it really emulates what it's really going to look like. And it felt
like the speed of it.
Right, exactly. Like everybody's kind of bearing down and like, let's go, and focusing in. They're throwing out play calls. And Kevin O'Connell said that sometimes he throws out a play call that maybe they haven't worked on or didn't script or something. And with Darnold, he completed his first pass really nicely, like on time to Brandon Powell. All right, off we go. And then took 3 shots to Jefferson that seemed like, I just want to see how far I can push the envelope with Justin Jefferson. None of them ended up getting into his hands. And then on 4th down, he ends up throwing a pick that he probably should have dumped it underneath to an open tight end. And
which he said.
Right, these are the things that with Sam Darnold, he's got to learn in this offense. And I was thinking about this a lot today as I was kind of going through what I'm going to write and everything about how they're turning their offense over to a guy who just got here when the rest of the group has known this offense. And there's still this process going on. And Garrett Bradbury talked to us about it yesterday that I thought was really interesting, of Darnold getting to understand how far he can push the envelope with Jefferson, when he's going to have to take what's in front of him. We still do see him just taking shots and getting picked off, though. I mean, you're never going to take the Sam Darnold out of Sam Darnold, but today was a much more functional day overall, I think, for him to get a lot of work in the red zone, to feel like they were scoring touchdowns over and over again. And it would have just been nice for him after a pretty tough first day to have a better 2-minute drill and not have it end like that. But it seemed like everybody viewed this as going up against maybe the number one defense in football, and there actually being some progress made even if it looked ugly.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because a lot of the Vikings players and coaches talked about how different it was going against this Browns defense. And I asked Sam Darnold a little bit about, like, what makes what they do different. And he essentially said, like, they kind of just line it up and play. Like, they are so talented and so dynamic, I think, on the front and even in the back end. Like you mentioned, the cornerback going up against Justin Jefferson, it was not Denzel Ward, who has a gigantic contract. It was Martin Emerson Jr., a guy, I got to be honest, I didn't know a ton about, but you watch that dude out here and you're like, man, could the Vikings just find a guy like that? Like, it would just
they
be
got four.
Right, just spectacular to find a guy like that. So to me, that was as interesting as anything else, just the difference in what the Vikings were facing. But the Sam Darnold comment is really a lot of how I thought about today. It's like, when he can just be in the pocket and make decisions quickly from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3, get rid of it, you feel like like he's got the arm strength to pump it in there. The plays are set up for it to work like that. But when he's scrambling outside, he has the athleticism to look dynamic, but I am like holding on tight for dear life that, like, don't throw it in a triple coverage and get picked off. Like, there was a play yesterday, speaking about Wednesday, where he scrambled out to the left, and it looked like he had Jalen Naylor kind of in the flat. Instead, he tried Justin Jefferson deep into double coverage. It was picked off. And so I feel like the way I will watch Sam Darnold over the next few weeks and into the season is, like, how capable is he of just being calm and quiet in the pocket. And I think it's like, given what we've seen over the course of his career, we'll see. And to me, it's a lot on Kevin O'Connell to eliminate the decision-making for him pre-snap so that he can just sit there, point and shoot in a way that he can be really effective given the arm strength and the overall just the fluidity at which he throws the football.
I think what I came to as a conclusion after watching these 2 days is that the Darnold in Darnold is not going to be removed. And, well, he was a lot better than Jameis Winston, who was horrendous in these two practices. I mean, like, comically bad in these two practices. But they have something in common, which is I think that something clicks in their brain when it's time to try to make a play, and they just go insane. There's something, and Nick Mullins is this too, where instead of just being like, and Kirk was the opposite, where Kirk had to almost press himself as he went through his career and learn not to always check down, and then he did it anyway in 4th and 8. But in some points in his career with the Vikings, I thought he actually got better at kind of putting it up for Jefferson and trusting him a little bit more, whereas it's the opposite with Darnold, where if he had a little more Kirk in him, you didn't hear me say that, right? But it's actually true. If he had a little more decision-making, just like, oh, no, I can actually just play this safe and get a completion and move on, as opposed to, oh my gosh, got to do something insane, got to be the GOAT, got to throw it crazy long, and he's still doing it.
But part of me can understand, like, can you imagine if you're a high schooler and you're doing that and you're just dominating, and at USC is your sophomore year, if you're just scrambling and throwing balls over, then, like, I mean, you would think over a 7-year span, you start to realize, like, I can't do this anymore. But to your point, there might just be with some of these guys an inability to turn that dial off. And again, it's why sometimes you watch Sam Darnold and you see the flashes of athleticism and arm talent where it's like, well, that cannot be taught. But a lot of times where, I mean, in this league, as we found out last year towards the back half, like throughout the whole year, really, turnovers lose you games. Just mitigate the turnovers. And it is where you mentioned the running game in the red zone. I think I already thought the run game was going to shoulder a gigantic load for this to work offensively. But I think even more now, it is going to be on Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler to perform the way that I think at their highest end, if they're fully healthy, can perform. And it's going to be on this staff and the offensive line to symbiotically structure their scheme and just their ability to block for those guys. So, I mean, really, that was another thought I had today. It's like I already really thought Aaron Jones was going to have a good year, and he needed to have a good year. But to me, it's just kind of – it's settling in more, I think, just watching what I've seen the last 2 days.
When Sam Darnold had, in 2022, more clean pockets, more play actions, more screens, he performed better. And then occasionally he could do something wild. And then occasionally he would do something terrible. But they really kind of reined him in a lot. And I don't think Kevin O'Connell's offense is a rein a quarterback in type of offense, but I do think it starts with Aaron Jones to some extent because it opens up those other things you can do. We've seen them run a lot of screen plays, not necessarily in these practices, but just over training camp in general, being better in that part where they were horrible last year at the screen game. Their numbers were really bad. In the play action, they were not as good as Kirk Cousins usually was in his previous seasons. Those are things that make life easier and decisions simpler on the quarterback. Dropping straight back and having 4 options and Myles Garrett pinning the ears back and all that stuff was just insane. And even Justin Jefferson was like, what the heck was that we just watched? I mean, it's crazy. It was funny because Sam Darnold was like, well, Garrett's pretty good. Justin Jefferson was like, he's a freak. It's very funny, the difference between them. I got to say,
and I don't like this, maybe you shouldn't say it on the podcast. I don't really know. But we walk outside of the practice fields on Wednesday, and I was just like looking around. I don't know where I am. I'm in Berea. I'm in Cleveland. Why am I here? What am I going? And I looked in the weight room, and I just see Myles Garrett shirtless sitting on the bench press with a headband. And I was like, is that a superhero? Like, what is – it was I was like, this guy is at a level at which, from a physicality standpoint. And then you hear Christian Darrisaw talk about, like, the technique and the speed, and it's just – I mean, there was one play where Brian O'Neill, who I thought has looked really good, he got, like, sideswiped by Myles Garrett. I was just like – who? Oh, obviously that's what it was. But yeah,
I mean, you might be talking about the best player in the whole league when you're watching him. I mean, he really is that good. Other than Patrick Mahomes, obviously. I mean, on defense, but. Putting that aside, our marveling at seeing Myles Garrett up close. If you can't, that got a little weird. If you can't appreciate, though, what that guy looks like, I don't know why you would even do this, come to a practice like this. But the point on Sam Darnold is you're never going to stop that button in his head that goes off or that blinker that goes off that says just do something insane with your arm because you're crazy talented. And if it was, then he would have stopped doing it by now, but he still does it in practice all the time. I think it's about everything else. It's about hitting those deep balls to Justin Jefferson when you get the chances. It's the play caller, setting up for as many play actions as you possibly can with Aaron Jones being in favorable spots where he performed a lot better when he was with Carolina, not allowing the Myles Garretts of the world because they will play them. Danielle Hunter's on your schedule. You're playing a lot of freaks of the world.
Rashawn Gary, right. Nick Bosa.
They're all coming to town. And even the beginning of the season, Dexter Lawrence is going to put a lot of pressure on them. It's never going to stop. Player. Right. It's never going to stop. You're not going to not have a guy who's freakish on the other side. So how can you limit the potential plays where you could get damage? And I think what we saw today was, hey, it's third down. It's the 2-minute drill. He's going to try to do something great. And I think that probably puts a ceiling on what this can be with Sam Darnold, even if it can be good. But I want you to project for me after now a big sample size of beginning of camp all the way to now. We know he's QB1 going forward. Project for me the floor and ceiling if Sam Darnold plays 17 games, which is very possible right now with no J.J. McCarthy.
Project the floor and ceiling. You didn't proceed. This is the thing. You don't prepare me for these things, and now here I am. I mean, the floor is to me, it's just so many turnovers where it's like untenable. Like, I mean, that to me is the floor. Now, what does that mean from a statistics standpoint? What does that mean from win-loss? It doesn't mean that the people watching the show are probably as locked in as they were right now or in past weeks. That's what that probably means. The ceiling, I mean, I think it is like the Baker Mayfield of last year where it's not always going to be perfect, but there are going to be enough flashes where last year with Baker Mayfield, you would hear like, he's not doing that thing where he's dropping his eyes and his helmet as much as he used to. Did Dave Canales coach that out of him? And so that's it, where maybe it's 25 touchdowns and interceptions and fumbles, but to where you are competitive in every single game and you are not being placed in situations where you're placed out of games because of the turnovers. To me, that's the ceiling, and the floor is, again, it's like last year where it's like, all right, should we turn? Who do we turn to at this point? Now the problem is, like, if you turn to Nick Mullins, he's like maybe this without the potential ceiling, and on Red Bull, like it's just like it's a totally different deal. But the one thing that you said that I was thinking about, and it kind of ties a little bit with Jordan Addison and what his potential health's going to be, but like. I felt like we've seen a lot of heavy personnel all training camp, whether it's 2 tight ends, whether it's 21 personnel with C.J. Ham in the backfield. Now, maybe you're going to tell me rightfully that you've seen C.J. Ham used in training camp for 7 years, and then when the season happens, it doesn't work. But I feel like with their receiving core and how much they're going to need to run the ball, I would expect them to stick in more heavy personnel than they have in the first 2 years after talking about it a little bit with Kevin O'Connell. So that aspect to me of then how you structure your pass game around that is going to be interesting. But to me, it does confirm the fact that I really do believe, as much as they've talked about running the football more effectively, as much as Kevin O'Connell has talked about play style, like that they are committed to this in some regard because they have to be with Sam Darnold as quarterback. What do you think about the projection, though, that I gave?
I mean, I think that the projection is reasonable, that if it's a Baker Mayfield 9-8, that means there were some serious ups and downs, because Baker Mayfield, people acted like because he won a playoff game that he had this unbelievable season. I think they were 20th in offense. I mean, even when you go back to –
their run game was terrible. But.
Right, yeah. But, I mean, even Mayfield, maybe he was like 15th in quarterback rating or something, 15th to 17th in PFF grade. I mean, it's not like he had this MVP type of season. He had a – really fun, throw it up to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Those players sound similar to what the Vikings have here. And O'Connell reiterated that it's not going to be too serious for Jordan Addison and his ankle, so we can count on him probably for week 1. And that he's going to have this opportunity to throw to those guys a lot, but he's also going to have some really bad games and some big mistakes that are costly. And they have good enough, and we'll talk about the defense, he has good enough defense, good enough scheme, good enough players around him to be in the conversation still as they go down the stretch for a playoff spot. But I think that's probably the ceiling, where the ceiling was different with J.J. McCarthy, because I don't think the wins and losses were different, but the excitement level was different. A 9-8 season with Sam Darnold could be really entertaining, but I don't think it's like the future is so bright. That's what it would have been if it was J.J. McCarthy. Not to kick y'all while you're down, but that's just the fact of the matter. So I think that you're being reasonable. Also with C.J. Ham, the last time they had a good running game, they used C.J. Ham. All the last times that they had, there was 2019, 2020, and 2021, they had good running games, and he was a big part of the Kubiak style, the Kevin Stefanski style. Once they didn't use him, it wasn't the same. That's kind of their edge, because no one is prepared for a fullback and a Josh Oliver, but it really comes down to the running back last year was not a fit for the scheme and just was very bad. The running back is good. What we've seen of Aaron Jones has been extremely, extremely impressive so far, but the interior offensive line also has to be good as well, and I don't have a lot of confidence still in those guards until we really see them do it.
And I think that group has to be good beyond just the protection, from a blocking standpoint, both on the ground and in protection. Like, as I think you've learned and I've learned, and it's become pretty obvious, like, there is more on Garrett Bradbury's shoulders here in terms of pre-snap, assessing fronts, assessing coverages, assessing when to change the cadence, protections. There's more on his shoulders and the offensive line's shoulders than there has been, because Kirk Cousins, I mean, he pretty much commanded that entire unit. Like, if he saw something, it seemed like, listen to Garrett talk about it the other day, Kirk made the calls, we trusted Kirk, that's how it went. And I'm sure there was a little trial and error there, but it felt like Kirk was running the show, and everything was kind of at his whim. Whereas now, Sam Darnold, who is trying to learn this complex playbook system that took Kirk Cousins into the season still trying to learn, has removed some from the overall scope of what you'd have to learn in terms of protection and cadence and all that. And Garrett Bradbury's assumed some of that role so that Sam can just focus on concepts and developing rhythm with Justin Jefferson and all that stuff. So beyond just run blocking and holding up in pass protection, that interior group has more on its shoulders from a mental football aptitude standpoint. And for me, like, they have to prove that they are capable of taking that onus that is now on them and turning that into a positive. Like, I need to see that. And out here, it's a different deal, of course. Obviously, you don't fully get to see everything, and that Browns front is menacing. But I think they're going to have stuff to work through in that regard on that unit, which is an important one.
Folks, US Cellular noticed that the way we use our phones has gotten to be ironic. We try to put our phones down for dinner, but the menu is on a QR code. That's ironic. We hit like on social media posts that we don't actually like. Ironic. Which is why US Cellular has created Us Mode to help us reconnect with each other and use our phones less ironically. A phone company wanting people to use their phones less? Ironic. Let's find us again with Us Mode from US Cellular. Visit uscellular.com/built-for-us to get started. In that, I just need to see it in real games. Of course, they were going to look bad against the Browns at times. I thought that they had some good reps in the red zone against the Browns today. That was a lot different, I think, than yesterday as far as the offensive line went. But I can't tell you. I mean, what's the difference with a guard between giving up 3 pressures a game and 2, and at the end of the year, that's a huge difference between a top-notch player and an average or a mediocre player. I can't tell that from here. Whether Blake Brandel has not taken anything but first-team reps. That's what I know. They haven't mixed anybody else in, and that's all I can really tell you is that they must trust him enough. But when you're run blocking in a real game versus even in a joint practice, and the running back can get tackled or not get tackled, that's easier to see the result than today, where it's like, maybe he would have bounced it outside, or maybe he was in the right spot. And in this case, I truly don't know. Was he supposed to hit the linebacker? Was he supposed to do something else? So we're going to find out when it comes to that. If the run game is good, the ceiling is higher because you can play everything off that, and I think Sam Darnold needs it really a lot in order for this thing to succeed. Now, just real quick, this is the Purple Insider podcast, but it's also the Alec Lewis show. This is a joint podcast, by the way. This has never happened in Purple Insider
history. Of podcasts.
Maybe
it's never
not.
happened.
Maybe you can't prove that it has, where 2 podcasters have recorded the same podcast and both put it on their podcast feed. It may be illegal, but we're going to do it. So that means what I'm going to do here is now I'm going to hand it over to you. If you haven't checked out the Alec Lewis show, by the way, it's Alec's new podcast. Make sure you go download it. Check it out on YouTube. I already clicked don't recommend channel when it popped up in my feed.
Yeah,
so I think
and
that's
everyone else who watched
I was going to say, I think that's what you're supposed to do. But now you host. Now your turn. Now you ask me.
You didn't tell me when you were going to turn it over. So this is like Kevin O'Connell
keep you on your toes.
It's like Kevin O'Connell calling a play that was not on the play sheet. It's to keep me on my toes and keep me preparing. No, I'm glad you did it. Let's talk about the defense for a little bit. What stood out to you and why? What are you most excited about when you watch what's possible with this defense with this new personnel?
Well, number one, what stood out to me here was everyone was good for them. I mean, it was just a great couple of days. Now, I saw Amari Cooper go back to the room. That changes things because he says he's one of the best players in the entire NFL. So that, I'm sure, hurt them in the same way that it did the Vikings losing Jordan Addison. But at the same time, the entire front seven was causing, and Blake Cashman has a finger injury. I guess he's going to get
he underwent a procedure.
Stitches, though.
Yeah.
But when you say underwent procedure,
right.
I didn't want to tweet that because I thought, that sounds like his finger fell off. Stitches.
And Kevin said he'd be good to go.
Yeah,
Kevin,
he's a linebacker. If a finger caused him problems, what kind of linebacker would he be? Yeah, I'm calling you out, Blake.
Yeah, what are you talking? What do you know? Yeah. Now you're taking my host thing and you're just calling out Blake Cashman, linebacker?
Who's this guest on your show, on the Alec Lewis show, calling out linebackers? No, truly, though, Ivan Pace had an interception today.
He looks great. I got to say.
He looks bigger to me, not taller, but he looks like thicker and more explosive this year than he did last year when he was just coming out of college. Like, he really took it seriously this year. We haven't talked about him a lot because we just assume that he's good. I saw confusion on the face of Deshaun Watson over and over and over again today. And remember, this is a closed practice, so we're seeing the scheme. We're not seeing, it's not like in front of the fans just going with the base stuff. You know what I was surprised by, though, over these 2 days was the interior of the D-line. And I'm not suggesting that over 17 games they're going to be above average, but I thought they had a good time with this Browns offensive line. Now, I went and watched some Browns podcasts to see what they thought, and they were complaining nonstop about the line. So maybe it's that. But Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner had one hell of a pass rush today.
I was going to bring it up.
He put his hands on a man and drove him all the way back into Deshaun Watson. He showed the power, not just the quickness. He really showed the power. It has been a great run for Dallas Turner. Andrew Van Ginkel, I mentioned on the show yesterday, was really, really good in practice yesterday. I just think that this defense is a lot more talented than it was last year, even despite the issues at cornerback. And today, Kevin O'Connell reiterated, it sounds to me, let me just paraphrase, we want you, Stephon Gilmore. Would you please sign with us? Am I viewing that wrong? That's what it sounds like.
He's a player we really respect.
We really
Flo
love
has
him.
the relationship. We're going to keep in communication with him.
He smells great.
Here's the deal, though, with Stephon Gilmore, and maybe I'll get your take on this. Like, if you are a 33-year-old as accomplished as he is, why would you not wait for the market to potentially need more for teams in the NFL to have cornerback injuries to where your services are needed more than they are right now? And why would you show up to training camp this early if you don't have to? Like, yes, the guy's going to be in shape. He's Stephon Gilmore. He knows what to do to get his body right. But what do you think about that?
And he's also got money. I mean, he's made his money during his career. It's not like if it's $3 million or $7 million that he's going to be like, oh man, well, I really need that extra couple. I don't know how he manages
Justin Simmons
his money.
Today signed for like $8.1 million. I saw,
which is probably in the ballpark of what you'd have to pay for Stephon Gilmore, and there's no downside to it if they really want him to be here. But I agree with your main point, which is at this point in his career, he may have family considerations where he wants to play in a certain city. He may have money considerations that someone else might come in with a bigger offer. So I was making fun of that, but that's also possible. But what's the most likely is either family or Super Bowl. And I don't think the Vikings, at least as of this moment, fit into either one. I think, is he from South Carolina? That's where he played?
Believe so, yeah.
Okay,
Southeast.
So you're talking about quite a ways away from here. And then also a team that, if you look at the Vegas odds, is 6.5 or 7 win team. They probably have the 25th best odds to win the Super Bowl. And by the way, their super exciting young quarterback just got injured for the year. That doesn't scream to me 34-year-old player. Maybe he just wants to keep playing, and he's going to go on from here and keep playing, and so he'll eventually decide, yes, he wants to come here. But I just would think that at his age there's other considerations, because it sounds to me like the Vikings are going to put the dollars on the table to get him, and they're going to give him a lot of pats on the back, and we want you here and everything. But I don't know if it's actually going to happen or not.
Well, you mentioned, I was thinking today as I watched Andrew Van Ginkel look as good. He's healthy. He looks as good as I expected him to look. I thought at the time of that signing, pairing him again with Brian Flores in this scheme in a place that's near his home for a guy who, if you look at like pressure rates over the last couple of years, he ranks, depending on how you qualify it, he ranks very highly from a pressure rate standpoint. And then PFF has him as like the highest graded coverage edge rush in the entire NFL. So I've thought for a long time that he would be as effective as it looked like he was out there today. And then Dallas Turner, the rush you mentioned, and then going back to Saturday and how he looked against the Raiders, that group has really excited me. So I thought today, if you added another lockdown cornerback who can play man coverage, and Shaq Griffin is back healthy as they're expecting him to be for the season, I'll ask you, what does this defense, what is the ceiling and floor for the defense at that point? If you were to add a player like him on the edge and play man coverage, which Justin Jefferson just kind of admitted, we don't really ever see man coverage, even though they've talked about wanting to play it more. He kind of just said that. But what would you say as the ceiling and floor for the defense if you could add a player like that at cornerback?
So maybe not putting so much emphasis on the schedule, because I do think the schedule has a lot of really good quarterbacks, and right out of the gate, a lot of really good offenses overall. But taking the totality of the season, they play Tennessee, they play Jacksonville, teams like that. I think that the ceiling of this defense, and it also could be a little bit high on the defense, and this offense isn't that great. Their offensive line isn't that great, and their quarterback hasn't been great in a long time now. Still, I think that I would probably put it in the top 8. It would be their ceiling.
Wow.
I don't think it can quite be in the top 5. Now, I was looking back. Miami in 2020 was 6th, and they went, I think, 10-6 that year with a very mediocre offense, maybe the 15th best offense in the league. And I don't think that's a ridiculous thing that could happen here. I was actually saying to a friend of the show, Tyler Dunn, who does Go Long, Buffalo guy like myself.
Good dude.
And we were talking, and I said, I think this team's going to win games 17-14. I mean, I know that Sam Darnold's probably going to have his ups and downs, but they may have to win games defensively. I just thought, as much as we've talked about the injuries on the offensive side with McCarthy and now Addison getting banged up, if Griffin does come back, as Kevin O'Connell has insisted he will by week 1, and Morrow, maybe whether they bring in Gilmore or not, I'm not sure. That might change the ceiling. But everything at every other position is so good. They probably have like 9 players who are a B or higher caliber player and 2 cornerback starters that are a C or less.
The safeties are, that first day out here, I remember Cam Bynum, incredible read, deflects a pass in the middle of the field. I believe Josh Metellus had an interception today. Those guys are just so versatile. I don't know what you think about this, but Harrison Smith to me, he looks maybe more athletic than I remember him looking last year. I don't know. It just it stood out to me like there is he to me he's always cerebral enough to where he's going to put himself in optimal situations. But this year for some reason his command out there just looks like a different deal, and maybe that will be proven to be very false months from now. But that room as a whole just gives me so much confidence, especially because of just how much of a role they have from a communication aspect to it. Like, to me, they are kind of the hub of what Brian Flores wants to do. And then you pair them with Ivan Pace Jr., who will also have a pretty big role in communication. And there's just a lot of continuity. Brian Flores, I just have a lot of trust in with how much he can affect opposing teams, even if the quarterbacks are better. So it's an interesting unit in a way that, like, I've been skeptical because of the cornerbacks, and I still am. But if you were to add there, it turns into, like, the obvious identity of the team, which it became last year after Kirk got hurt.
Well, and that's part of it, too, is that Brian Flores has been able to build this thing in his own identity as opposed to just taking on these players. He's been able to have an entire year with Metellus, an entire year with Cam Bynum, who I agree has been one of their better players in all of training camp. I think that he's emerged as someone who went from, they drafted Lewis Cine thinking that he wasn't going to be anything, and then all of a sudden he wins the job, and 2 years later he's considered a really good player in this defense. It's just that when you look at the starting lineup, outside of corner, defensive tackle is pretty meaty in there, and they don't get after the quarterback a lot, but Tillery is better than what they had last year, and he's been pretty good since he survived the cleating of 2024. Thank goodness. I think overall it is a deeper team than it's been. It's probably the best defensive unit they've had since 2019, and then when you know the guy who's calling the plays, that's really big for them. And I think when we talk about the overall ceiling of this team, that we're always kind of fluctuating back and forth, what could it be? If they do take on a different identity, one that Kevin O'Connell has not had with Kirk Cousins, but more of a play action, run, play defense, take the ball away on defense, and if they get some fumbles go their way this year and not the other way, then you could see them being a team that other teams don't want to face, because that's what Miami became once he was able to build that defense in his vision. I think they went from his first year, they were like 32nd.
Yeah, it was like.
And the second year, they were 6th. And this is year 2 for Flores with a lot more talent. So health is going to be a big deal. How the corners play is going to be a big deal. But these last 2 days, they were just phenomenal. Yeah. Just straight up dominant. Maybe it's a little too much because of what we just saw, but it was really a dominant performance.
The red zone possession that ended practice, where it was Jameis Winston, And there, I mean, he was just sailing, but like it looked like some of his passes were landing like in the facility.
It didn't go well,
like he had no time. Even when he did have time, he looked quite affected by it. But I mean, you mentioned the interior of the defensive line, and the two things that I think will be worth watching is what does their stunt usage look like this year compared to last year? I've seen a lot of looping in and a lot of pressure generated off that. Even in the game Saturday against the Raiders, that's been a constant theme. The other thing I saw today in the red zone is they really and I don't know if it was just third downs, but I think it was all downs where they took Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Bullard off the field, and their defensive front was just Jihad Ward, Patrick Jones II, Andrew Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, Jonathan Grenard. Like, they had them all out there. They had them. It was like field goal block where they were all lined up on the line of scrimmage. And obviously the Browns weren't running the football in those situations, so it made more sense to do that. But Brian Flores got creative with the personnel last year, and when you have the amount of edge rushers that they have right now and guys of different sizes like a Jihad Ward is, I expect more creativity probably in that regard, which makes – I don't know. I think it makes you a little friskier on that unit that besides cornerback would probably be the one area that you'd be like, man, they don't have total juice in that regard.
Well, and Jihad Ward has kind of been an interesting guy because he is a little bit of a mix between a defensive tackle and defensive end because he's so freaking large.
Gigantic.
So he can do that. Their package where they put in for third downs, they got basically all defensive ends going in there or edge rushers, and they can have them kind of go wild with a lot of different creativity for Flores. And I guess I'm just becoming more sold on the entire operation and the flexibility of it, and also the vision coming to life with Flores to believe that they could survive the early part of the season because they're going to have some good defensive performances, and you're going to face good quarterbacks as well. But maybe you get into slugfests with those teams, and you are playing a little more of a low-scoring style, because I think this defense, as of right now, unless it changes health-wise, which it always can, is going to be quite good. Now, I know you've got to catch a flight soon, but
very soon.
Let me throw this out there to you. We can't close this out.
I don't know what's coming.
You should. The Vikings closed out their joint practices here with Will Reichard. 5 for 5. Bang, 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 bang. And then from way downtown, I don't know how many yards it was. This is like 52. Bang. Over the top of the goalposts almost. This dude is just crushing training camp. He's missed 2 kicks the entire offseason. The entire offseason.
He's like 25 or 27, something in that range. Are you surprised?
Yeah, a little. He's a 6th-round kicker. I don't know. He had a good history.
I get the history that the listeners who are they're probably like, you're an idiot because you don't know what we've been through in this.
Stop hyping the kicker. Yeah.
Yes.
He's going to break our hearts. Yeah, we've heard it.
My whole story was essentially Alabama. I'm from Alabama. Alabama, as the people who listen to the Alec Lewis show hopefully know by now.
Oh, you talk about it all the time, as I've definitely heard on the show.
Yeah. Alabama's kicker situation for like 15 years under Nick Saban, people thought it was cursed. People were like, Nick Saban can recruit all of these NFL, Amari Cooper, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, TJ Yeldon, I don't know what, Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram. I mean, it was nonstop, but we can't recruit a kicker. Like, that was always the idea. And Will Reichard, who wasn't going to go to Alabama, he didn't grow up an Alabama fan. I think part of the reason he went to Alabama, beyond wanting to be close to family, was like, enough of this crap. Like, I'm gonna change the tide, and he did change the tide. That was no pun intended, but pretty good. And 6 years, he set the record above Daniel Carlson of the most leading scorer in college football. And it's so funny when you sit down and talk to him. Like, he's a very, as all kickers are, he's very interesting, quirky. But there is like this quiet confidence of like, I know I'm good. I know this is gonna work. And then when you watch him kick, it's just. I've compared it. It's like it would be like standing behind Scotty Scheffler on the range. It's just like ball flight's perfect, the fluidity's perfect. He's such a small guy, but the power seems to be there. It has been. I tweeted today per usual because it's just I expect it. Now, if at some point in week 1 in New York he misses the game-winning kick, you're gonna clip this and be like, "You're an idiot," which I am, and that'll be great. But it's been. I mean, he is just money.
I got a theory. about Will Reichard. You want to hear my theory?
I guess.
All right. So you know how baseball pitchers, when I was young, if you threw 96 miles an hour, oh my God. I mean, you were like a superstar. You were Roger Clemens would throw 96. It was unbelievable. And then all of a sudden, internet comes around, specialists come around, and biochemistry comes around. Yep. It comes around.
Biochemistry.
And all these things for the biochemistry. Now every pitcher understands this is exactly the most efficient way to do it. You mentioned Scotty Scheffler. He's got a little bit of a weird swing, but with the golf swing.
Like John Rahm.
These guys.
He's an example of a guy who's like gotten biomechanically assessed.
They understand exactly how to create the most speed for the club, the most speed for the arm, to the point where it rips their arms off. I think that Will Reichard grew up in an era where he had all this stuff, special training, video, analysis, all that stuff from the time he was 6 years old. I think he's coming from a different place than a lot of the kickers who have been in the NFL for a long time, and he is part of an era of guys who throw 104 as opposed to 96. It's just different. Batters who now strike the ball to hit home runs as opposed to your line drive hitter. He's part of a different generation. And when I see him kick, the ball looks different than any other kicker I've ever covered. The amount of distance and height, it's just, you know what I'm talking about. The way that it goes, a 52-yard field goal should not go over the top of the goalpost.
It's so perfect.
And right down the middle.
But here's the one thing I will say about him.
If he stinks, then please bring that back up to me. That'll be the funniest, because that sounded really smart.
The theory is accurate. I mean, I do think there is more being done from a technological development aspect than ever before, and that he grew up in this era. But the one thing, I think there's a lot of guys who are tailor-made with their biomechanics and the way they swing the ball to boot the ball for power and accuracy. But the thing for him, I think it's almost like a muscle memory, like a Steph Curry muscle memory, where it's like some guys, he's
Roger Clemens, he's Steph Curry, he's Scotty Scheffler.
No, but you know what I'm saying, where like there is a muscle memory aspect that I don't know if you can develop that. And then there's, to me with him, just watching him kick in big games, there is like a psychological ability to withstand that may or may not come up just from what he's been through from an adversity standpoint, but there is like you can't touch me. There's nothing about this pressurized 100,000 people environment that can affect the job that I'm about to do right here that I think he has. Now, the NFL is different. Every Sunday you're the best of the worst. The narratives will go crazy.
It's way different,
yeah. But to me, I think over time we will see that aspect separates him at a way that, even though he does strike the ball incredibly impressively, I think that aspect exists too.
You know what he has too? He has nerd swag. You know, where like you get the kid who's top of class, but he knows it, and he walks around like, yeah, that's right. I'm the best at this, and that's how he walks around.
I think I heard in one of those final kicks, I'm pretty sure it was Justin Jefferson, like, let's go, Will. And I'm thinking like, Justin's yelling at Will Riker, but I just think there is kind of like this guy is him like type thing.
Let me tell you something funny, and then I want you to put a bow on these last 2 days before you go to the airport.
Okay.
I was standing next to Justin Jefferson, so he came off the field after he made a catch in a red zone drill, and he walked over and he was standing next to me, and I said, good catch. And he said, thank you. And then Lucky Jackson caught one right in front of us, and he sort of charged forward to celebrate Lucky Jackson's catch, and there was a cord there that he tripped over for a second. And he went like this and caught himself, and then was like, yeah, Lucky, let's go. And he walked back over because I was near the water. And I said, there is a cord there. We do not need this. Okay. Like, you watch that right there. So this close to Justin Jefferson celebrating a Lucky Jackson reception.
I wish you hadn't told me
and tearing
that.
everything in his knee.
It's
a delicate situation. But I just thought it went through my mind. I would have been standing right here for like the worst moment in Vikings almost history. I want you to put a bow on the whole thing. There was, and take as long as you need, miss the flight if you have to.
Thank you.
But 2 days, a lot of work for this team, and now we're in the final stretch. This is it. I mean, the preseason game, sorry to friends and family of the third stringers, doesn't really matter. The other preseason game really doesn't matter. This is it. This was the big peak of camp, and now we're on to the kind of final stretch here. So what will you be thinking about on your flight back to Minnesota?
Oh, man, I'll probably be thinking about over the last 2 years and covering this team, and you've been here a lot longer than I have, but they have navigated a lot of adversity. And I know in every building guys get hurt. There are years where your superstar wide receiver and your quarterback gets hurt. There are years where cornerbacks tear ACLs. I mean, but I just I really felt last year once they bounced back from the 1-3 start, which I believe it was, after a lot of the turnovers, like their response from that until Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles was like the ultimate test of what they've talked a lot about in terms of the guys we bring in here, the culture, all that stuff. And it was, for me, covering the NFL, it's not something they talked about in baseball all the time, but it was something I really was like, you know what? Like, I'm not sure if I put enough into like the chemistry of this stuff and how much it matters. And so given all that they've been through this year, and what we've seen this week with the JJ news, and obviously totally different situation with the Kyrie Jackson tragedy, like, to me, if they are to perform, just given all that's happened, and compete in against a schedule that is really tough, to me, it will be the ultimate test of like the mettle, METTLE, of what kind of this building and some of these guys in this locker room is about. And to like, we could talk about the run game and the offensive line and defensively if they can perform, but I really do think it is like, do these guys have the grit, to use a word like that? Mm-hmm. Are they led with that type of quality that allows them to transcend what I think a lot of us probably believe is likely to happen, just given how many hits there were. Like, look, was Sam Darnold always going to start probably week one? Yes. Like, I think everybody who covers the team has been around was going to do that. But even then, there was like a positivity that I think is almost like a wind at your back type of thing in your sales that they were going to benefit from with the hype around JJ. Mm-hmm. And so to not have that again, to me, it places more on the Harrison Smiths, the Josh Metellises, obviously the Kevin O'Connells too. Like, can we lift this boat amid the tide? And so it's a gut punch. It's been gut punch after gut punch, really. And I've given them credit for the way they've handled it, but it's going to be tough sledding. So yeah, I know that's a kind of a rambling way of going about it, but to me, it's just if this season ends and they go 9-8, or they go I don't know, 8-9, if they go any 9-7, whatever. I know I'm throwing out these random
9-7 probably can't happen, but
10-7.
Yeah,
like, to me, it will be the ultimate testament of like just kind of the quality of people and ability to withstand in that building. So that's and to me, I do think it's in there, but it is not going to be an easy path.
Yeah, I think I walk away thinking about, of course, the weight that this organization is carrying with Kyrie Jackson and almost with J.J. McCarthy. You could see how people's reaction is different than maybe it would have been. I think it would have been much more dour, much more down. Most guys have said, he's going to be in the building. He's 22. It's going to be all right. That whole thing, people say all the time, well, it put it in perspective for me. But I think it does. I think it did for everyone with what happened with Kyrie, that the real perspective is that he's still going to be the franchise quarterback going forward. But still, with that on top of it, and as promising as Mekhi Blackmon was to have these injuries, every year there are injuries, but these ones were especially difficult. And then with what happened with Kyrie Jackson, last home game, they have his family in, and his little brother's walking out onto the field. These are really difficult, emotional moments that I think they have a very good coach to guide them through.
I would agree.
Because Kevin O'Connell is very positive-minded. I think that's like how he always approaches these things. But then I kind of came back to, what? This season in itself is all going to depend on whether Sam Darnold throws that correct pass to the tight end for a first down or launches it to Justin Jefferson for an incompletion because he's insane. And that's the hard part about all narratives with all teams. This will come down to whether they can get the most out of Sam Darnold. If the defense gets them in a lot of games, maybe they have a chance. If they aren't as good as we thought they were this week, then they won't. But the way Sam Darnold looked at his best today versus at his worst today was so wide that I thought this can kind of go one way or the other, and a lot of it's just going to rest on those shoulders, and that's not what you wanted for this year. What you wanted was he's a just in case JJ isn't ready. He's also a guy you can easily pull and never feel bad about it, and now it's you're the guy, pal, and he's never been the guy to the point where he's taken a team to the playoffs. This is going to have to buck all of his previous history, and that's pretty daunting for a team that's already went through it. So I thought if the offense looks like this, they won't make the playoffs. That's just how it's going to be. If they play like they did in these 2 practices, they will not make the playoffs, period.
I'll say this, though. With Darnold, and I agree with what you said. I mean, the highs are high and the lows are really low in terms of just watching him on the practice field. But this was always going to be like, I mean, I think a lot of us views like this is probably his last true opportunity to like, can he make this happen? And now there is not that fallback option for them. So it's like you are the front face. This rides on you. And so for him, I mean, like he was always going to have to prove it. And if he did play well, it was going to prove a lot. But to me, it's even more now. Like, can you be the guy in this circumstance? And I mean, playoffs, yeah. To me, with the schedule that came out and just looking through it, it was always, to me, going to be really tough sledding. But, yeah, I mean, it's the defense, does give you some options.
It really good,
like
yeah.
Brian Flores, sometimes you would sit and watch and you're like, how would anyone sort through this? So that's we will find out.
All right, from the cross-country mortgage campus in Berea. Or Berea. Even Kevin O'Connell wasn't sure.
Berea. I don't need to come back to Berea anytime soon.
I don't either.
This was
it was fine. We went to IHOP. So no offense, shout out IHOP. The Alec Lewis Show is your podcast.
That is it.
You may be hearing it here if anyone is subscribed yet. And we'll see you back in Minnesota. Thanks for your time so much, Alec. We'll see you back there.
It was fun.
And thanks, everybody, for watching/listening. Football.